Hello. Hello. And welcome to the Night Sky Prince show. I'm the Night Sky Prince. Hello. Hello. What's up, guys? So let me just straighten out one thing real quick. Make sure I have Twitch chat open too so I can see everything everyone is saying. Okay. So recently we had the shareholders meeting. The transcript itself was in Japanese. I have machine translated it, and I'll be reiterating all of this in just a second because people will come in and out, and then they'll be like, what was going on? Like we always have. So we'll talk about that. And it's just really interesting. It's important to note here that everything that we will read today is not necessarily things that Square Enix is going to rush and do, or that they're even going to do at all. This is literally just an open forum for the stakeholders to share the types of things that they want to see from Square Enix. And some of these questions, are, things that just are not going to happen. Some of them are things that could happen. But again, it's just what the stakeholders are currently interested in. And I think we only have like a total of 11 questions that were kind of made available to us. Again, these come officially from Square Enix, and they were machine translated to us. So there may be some small inaccuracies or nuances different from what was stated in the original Japanese. But the big picture should be generally correct. Lance the Master, thank you so much for becoming a member. I appreciate you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Before we begin, you want the Sakaguchi FF17? I don't think Sakaguchi will direct a full AAA game at this point. I don't think Sakaguchi wants to direct a full AAA game. So I know a lot of people have like the dream of the Sakaguchi Final Fantasy XVII. I don't think it's going to happen. However, I do think that there is a possibility that we do get a Sakaguchi mainline in like a weird way. It's something that Tim Rogers actually proposed when I had him on my stream like 5 years ago. And by the way, Tim was supposed to come back on, and then he disappeared. I don't know where he's at. But I was never able to be like, hey, bro. So eventually I'll get him back on, and we'll have a talk about that. That might actually be like a terminally online episode for those of you who've been keeping track of our podcast. If you haven't kept track of our podcast, please go and take a look at our podcast because it's pretty sweet. It's me, Schrodinger's Baby Seal, and Daryl from Final Fantasy Union. We have our own podcast. Last episode, we had Blitz on there. It's very cool. He talked to us about Resident Evil stuff. So, yeah, I highly recommend checking out our podcast if you can. There was a rumor that Nomura was feeling sick and feeling too old. He had a Renatus interview addressing the previous interview he had, and also rumors he said he's fine and has more than 10 years to work. Okay, that's good. I'm glad. I mean, and not only am I glad, I'm sure Square Enix is glad because so much of Square Enix IP is just Nomura, right? Like so much of what they do is literally just him, right? So, the Final Fantasy side of things, like a good chunk of Final Fantasy, again, is just him. And all of Kingdom Hearts is literally him. And then a lot of their IPs in between, he's also fairly influential on. And so, It's really hard to imagine that. Do you think we will ever see a turn-based, I assume, Final Fantasy again? I don't think it's impossible. Probable is the question. And subtext, what's up, man? Probable is the question. And so, do I think it's probable? It's going to depend on a few factors. I don't think it'll be like the direct result of like Expedition 33, but I do think a turn-based Final Fantasy could be the result of action being really expensive and that going back to turn-based just being a great way to scale the series back down into something more affordable and you know, something that they could produce a little bit faster probably too. Not to say that turn-based games always necessarily have a significantly faster dev cycle, because dev cycle is so multifactorial. But oh, is Prodigy? Oh my, is Prodigy in here? Let me see. Oh my God, you are. If this next batch of games isn't successful, you think Square Enix is selling? Um, Prodigy. I called you Prodigy. I'm so sorry. It's Prodigy, right? I can't read. I'm like illiterate. But um I don't think they would sell, but I do think they would scale down, if that makes sense, right? Like I do think that they would I can't read most JRPG fans. I said anyway, sorry Prodigy. I don't know why I said prod. I'm dyslexic as fuck and sometimes words look different to me. But thank you for showing up, Prodigy. My um yeah, so I don't think that sell is the answer. I think that scale down is the answer. So you still get the thing because it's not like 3 million is an insignificant number, right? Like that's a pretty fucking good number, especially considering like the time they sold it just in 3 days, right? It was 3 million in 3 days, something like that. At least within the first week, for sure. And so really the thing of it is that even if you I think that it would have sold that much if it was a turn-based game too, right? I don't think that it would have made that huge of a difference otherwise, because I think that 3 million is like roughly the size of the people who are currently invested in Final Fantasy. So I think what would have happened is it like Final Fantasy 16 probably would not have sold like tremendously more at that point, because a lot of the problem with FF16 sales were not even necessarily rooted in 16. That's not to say that 16 itself is not not responsible, but like it's not to say that there aren't things with 16 itself that 16 could have done to sell better, but it's just to say that 16 from launch was already kind of put in a position where it was not going to sell too well just because of how the downward trend of Final Fantasy had been going at that point. So it's one of those things where, you know, if they were able to scale that down, 3 million can become a good number. But considering what it probably took to make those icon fights, I sincerely doubt that they're satisfied with the current. I mean, not even doubt it. They've pretty much more or less said that they're not satisfied with that number. 3 million is great. 3 million is awful for games that take a whole console generation to release and have dev teams in the hundreds or up to thousands or more with cutting edge graphics. Those are not modern AAA game sales. That's just a cold hard fact. 15 million or more is what you need to get returns on AAA games. Right. 50, like AAA games need a lot of money. They need to make really big returns, and they're hoping for 10 million sellers. And it's not like Square didn't put everything into 16. It's hard for me to like go back and look at a clear point in which they did something that I would be like, oh, this is like, this was a terrible idea, and that's why it didn't sell the way it sold. I mean, from a marketing perspective, not necessarily from like a game design perspective or anything. I think that they definitely marketed it as best as they possibly could. I just I don't think that there is anything left on the table for what they could have done in terms of marketing. Demo was a success. The launch event was a success. They had all the biggest streamers playing it. They had like Ludwig playing it. Even non-sponsored streamers, I believe, like Hassan was fucking playing the FF16 demo. But a lot of that also came after controversy. So I guess one thing that they could have done better was Yoshi P probably would have benefited from talking a little bit less during the lead up to the game's launch, because there was a lot of things that Yoshi P said that I was just like, brother, please stop. Costs are way too high internally, which is probably why having a smooth dev cycle is more important than ever for them. Right. Now, from what I'm understanding, their stock price shot up to the highest point ever just like a few days ago. And that was from them doing nothing. You may have to fact check me on that. But that actually just goes to show like how bad they were operating. So they're actually making more money than ever right now from not producing games. So that just goes to show you, one, how some of these games were performing, and two, how wasteful it was. No, Hassan didn't play it on stream. He played the demo back when it first launched. He played it. Ludwig, I believe, was sponsored to play it. Who else was sponsored? I want to say Sea-Dog Connor was sponsored to play the demo. But then he ended up playing the full game anyway, because he's like on his Final Fantasy binge. He's on his JRPG arc right now, which has actually been like pretty awesome to watch. So the issue isn't just with 16, even 7 Remake and Rebirth are part of the problem. At least with the 3 parts, should be able to have some asset reuse to lower some of the costs. But unless FF AAA games always make FF7 OG sales, which no FF game has ever done since 7 OG, SE will not continue thriving the way Capcom has, for example. Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing, right? Is that Capcom games are continuing to climb. The average Capcom game right now, the average, or let's specifically say Resident Evil, although it broadly applies to most Capcom games, the average Resident Evil, as well as the average Devil May Cry, sells more now than it did in previous generations and in the generations before that, right? So to give you an example, Resident Evil 2 OG sold like 5 million units. Resident Evil 2 Remake sold 15 million units, right? So they had triple the amount of people buying that game. And so Capcom has done, a really fantastic job of allowing their franchises to thrive and helping them grow in really profound ways. The problem with FF as FF currently stands is that FF games are now selling less than what they did in generations prior on average, right? So you look at Capcom and we're seeing this shrinking. You look at Atlas, actually. I'm not Capcom shrinking, but relative to Capcom, we're going the opposite direction. And we're also going the opposite direction relative to Atlas, because I don't know if you guys saw the video or not, but for those who didn't, We're at a total of 10 million in sales for Persona 5 across Persona 5 OG and Persona 5 Royal. And what's most interesting about Persona 5 Royal, by the way, is that P5R sold 1.75 million units last fiscal year. Now that is ridiculous because what the fuck even happened to make it sell that much last fiscal year? Nothing really. It's just had a ton of like gacha collaborations and stuff like that. But there are still people buying fucking Persona 5. There are still people buying and playing that. Ridiculous legs. P5 been doing squats every day with those legs. P5 never fucking skips leg day, man. Pragmata is going to sell more than FF16 and 7 Rebirth, no doubt in my mind. They will have a brand new IP that'll dwarf FF. Yeah, I mean, that's another thing too, Crossy, about like Capcom right now, is that Capcom is, they have faith in them, right? The Capcom brand is good, where people believe that because Capcom is making it, it is going to be good. And that is something that Square does not have in abundance right now, right? Maybe some of you thought this, but I don't think anyone was looking at, say, Forspoken when it was coming out, and their primary thought was like, that's going to be good because Square made it. Right? You didn't even go into it with that type of mindset, I'm pretty sure. Some of you may have been hopeful. I was hopeful that it would be good because I liked it and I thought it was interesting. But I wasn't like, this is going to be good because the team behind FF15 made it and Square Enix made it. And so I just have like this level of brand trust and safety with Square Enix. No. I say this as a KH3 enjoyer. I feel like it undersold 6.7 million with all the marketing buildup compared to something like DMC5 hitting 10 million seems a little disappointing. I don't know. I don't know. It's hard for me to say. I think that like that's about the same as like KH1 and 2, right? So at the very least, you can say that KH3 didn't sell less, which is like the current problem with with FF. At the very least, you can say that KH is selling to par with past entries. So that's not necessarily bad, but it does mean that KH3 definitely cost way fucking more. So, yeah, less of an issue, but still kind of a problem. But hopefully KH4 can kind of smooth that out. Prodigy saying, might just be me, but I feel like Square underestimates their IPs in terms of multimedia potential. No, they definitely do. Those KH3 sales, to be fair, from 2022. Yeah, I'm willing to bet that KH3 is probably closer to like 7 or 8 million. Yeah, it's possible that KH3 is at 8 million by now, because if those sales are from 2022, we've had 2 PC releases for it now. I wouldn't be completely surprised if it was at 8 million by now, which would be a pretty solid number. AAA is ridiculous. I know or I should say the community at large kind of compares stuff like Expedition 33 and Final Fantasy, and the comparison wouldn't necessarily be the raw sales to me, although in terms of like raw sales plus the Game Pass, I would still say that Expedition 33 is probably overall performing slightly better. But I think that kind of the takeaway there is that like the same takeaway that all AAA gets, which is we need to make less expensive games. Jonah, thank you so much for the super chat. Did you see that interview where Uematsu talked about how Squaresoft fell apart after Sakaguchi-san left? We can actually talk about that. after we finish this shareholder thing, which I think we're sufficiently warmed up here, so we can kind of dive into the shareholder report here. Bear in mind, again, for those who are just now joining us or weren't here earlier, this is machine translated from the original Japanese transcript. As such, there may be missing nuance, there may be things that don't sound quite as right, anything that you can imagine with machine translation. As such, give it a little bit of lenience, a little bit of room for interpretation, and yeah, all those things. Hi, when will you be starting the KH1 playthrough? I want to start it maybe next week. So you can look forward to that. My hope is to kind of do it in the same style that I did my Final Fantasy X essay. So we'll play through the game, we'll have discussions about it, and then we'll end it off with a really big video on Kingdom Hearts 1. That's what I'm hoping to do. I really, really enjoyed what we did with our Final Fantasy X stream and then video at the end. And I thought that was really cool. And as I reflect on it, I still think that was like one of the coolest things we did on the channel. So I'm still kind of like, is there a way for me to make that a regular thing? So in between making videos, right? So I'm like trying to figure out like, how can I balance having time to make those streams, do those streams, and then also have time to make videos regularly too. So we'll figure something out. The Sakaguchi thing reaffirms to me that Gooch probably saw Matsuno as someone who could carry FF onward, seeing as how he personally headhunted him back in the day. But we all know Matsuno had some opinions on how SE is managed and left during 12's development. I mean, yeah, Matsuno, Uematsu, basically all the greats during that period of time were like, we got to get the fuck up out of here. They lost a lot of great talent during that time, you know. So Matsuno left. I don't know exactly when Takahashi left. Monolith, Soft, Xenoblade, Xenogears, Takahashi. I don't know like when he left, but yeah. So Uematsu left during that period. Sakaguchi, when he left, he took a bunch of people with him. So yeah, not great. Not a great time for Square. That was probably the worst thing. Is their shareholder meeting recent? Yes. It was basically from like this past week. This is where people have been getting the whole Square Enix is going to make turn-based Final Fantasy again because they got ratioed by Expedition 33. This is where it kind of comes from. I talked about in my video how that's not quite what was said. I'll read that question again here for you guys who, since not everyone watched the video. And yeah, so let me zoom in here. Again, this is my own doc file where I just put all of the machine translation into. So the first question was, in recent years, we've seen a shift from quantity to quality, with experimental titles emerging such as Paranormicide, The Seven Mysteries of Hanjo, which received high acclaim. On the other hand, the last fiscal year saw no new titles or new IPs. In the HD game segment, with the focus mainly on remakes and series entries. As a result, opportunities for elementary and middle school students to engage in our games have declined, raising questions about fostering future talent who aspire to develop games at our company. What are your thoughts on this? And also, I just want to say that all of Square Enix's replies on this are just going to be like, we hear you and we understand, and we're going to do something about that, maybe. And the reason is purely because obviously this isn't to announce what their plans exactly are, and they're not going to do what every single shareholder tells them to do. This is just for them to take feedback on the concerns from shareholders. So answer one says, we understand your question as pointing out while in the past few years there were many experimental titles, some of which failed. But some new IPs gained high praise. Last year saw no new IPs, raising concern about nurturing future talent for our games. In the current game industry, creating new IPs is increasingly difficult. We are working to create those opportunities whenever possible. For example, Killer Inn, developed in collaboration with TBS Television, is one such initiative, and we intend to continue challenging ourselves with new IPs and genres. Additionally, as with Paranormicide, we recognize that it is not only to create IPs, but also to nurture them over time. Going forward, we will focus on creating opportunities that can appeal to a broader demographic, including elementary and middle school students. And yeah, that's kind of a big point to make is, younger people getting into these series, especially at that age. I mean, again, for most of us, that's probably the age where we first touch a Square Enix game, or we first touched, a JRPG in general, and it kind of shaped our tastes. And now we're obsessed with this company, and we're obsessed with, the IPs that they make, to the point that we're reading a fucking shareholder meeting. You know what I'm saying? So it's pretty fucking important. I don't think I'd be doing this if I discovered these games in college or something, like when I was 20. It had to be baked into my brain really early for me to care this much, for me to have a channel with most of my videos dedicated to these types of games, right? So it is very important for them in the future growth of their company to continue to make games that kind of really appeal to that younger demographic. So Repadusky, what's up? Just throwing it out there because I saw the name as soon as I tuned in. Paranormicide is awesome and super slept on. I wish they market it. Yeah, because I'm be real, I barely even know what Paranormicide even is, and I follow Square. So, and I do see quite a few people in chat saying like, "Oh, that game was bomb, dude. It was good," and I'm like, "Oh, was it? Like, I didn't even know." So let's go on to the next question. Crossy, you can rise up right now. This one's for you, buddy. It's about Dragon Quest. Okay. Looking at regional sales ratios for digital entertainment, it seems there has not been much change compared to last fiscal year. From this, I feel that turn-based combat in the HD 2D Dragon Quest III was well received even in overseas market, where action gameplay is the norm. Are multiple titles being considered with similar turn-based combat systems? So this is insane. And I didn't talk about this in my video. I probably should have in retrospect. Is that we actually got two questions about turn-based combat. I believe it's this and the other one that I had read in that video. But yeah, this is the first time I'm actually seeing shareholders ask about turn-based combat in like a big way, which is very interesting. Of course, Square Enix saying, we understand your question to be asking whether, since the sales ratio between Japan and other regions hasn't changed, it implies that Dragon Quest III's turn-based combat was accepted globally, and whether more titles with turn-based combat are planned. Turn-based combat continues to evolve in various ways, and it is widely appreciated worldwide, not just within the JRPG genre. I do think that this sentence right here, it is widely appreciated worldwide and not just within the JRPG genre. I do think that that's like probably referencing not only Expedition 33, but also Baldur's Gate 3 in an indirect way of speaking. I do think that is definitely talking about those two titles in particular. So they are noticing that there are turn-based systems that are selling and are doing well. So I do think that they are noticing that. On top of, again, Dragon Quest 3 HD 2D selling really well. So continuing on, they say, we believe there is ample potential for turn-based systems to be accepted globally. And as turn-based is one of our foundational elements, we need to continue to refine it carefully. Furthermore, as seen with HD 2D titles, we aim to evolve turn-based combat by adding new forms of value. So again, they do plan to keep their commitments to turn-based combat. The obligatory thing that we have to say, before we get canceled, chat, is that Square Enix does indeed make turn-based games. They make a lot of turn-based games. Technically, a good chunk of their output, maybe most of it even, is turn-based games. So yes, they still make turn-based games. They do play Bravely Default, play Octopath Traveler. Please don't clip me and put 4 different Square Enix turn-based games like Saga, Dragon Quest, and that's the easiest ratio that you can do on Twitter right now. Is anytime someone even says the word Final Fantasy and turn-based in one sentence, if you just put 4 Square Enix turn-based games in 4 image squares, it will automatically get 10,000 likes and a bunch of angry people being yeah, fuck you, one guy, for liking FF1 through 10. The Dragon Quest 3 HD 2D release was wild for many things. Besides the IDOS games, it was one of SE's best performing Steam games. I believe it is their best single player RPG on Steam, actually, or peak player count was one of the two, and most of the players were Japanese, which is wild because they typically aren't massive PC gamers compared to the rest of Asia. That is interesting. If you do that, people will say Square Enix don't do those games anymore. So there's a middle ground to this between Square Enix doesn't do those games anymore, and people also kind of being obtuse about what people mean about turn-based as well. And that is to say that kind of outside of Dragon Quest, a lot of their flagship stuff now is action oriented. So they don't really put turn-based into the non-Dragon Quest flagship titles for the most part, right? A lot of the turn-based stuff that they do, they don't spend nearly as much money on, which indicates to a lot of people a lack of faith in turn-based on the bigger scale, on the global stage, if that makes sense. And so both of those things are true, right? And that's what's really complicated about discussing Square Enix and turn-based, is that one, yes, it is true that they could have more faith in turn-based in terms of putting it in flagship titles other than Dragon Quest. But also, yes, they still produce plenty of turn-based games that are also great games as well. This is an fucking impossible nuance to discuss on Twitter, by the way. You literally fucking can't. No matter how many times, in how many different fucking ways, I've tried to walk this tightrope and discuss it, it always ends up blowing up in my face. And I'm just oh my God, these people are fucking idiots. You cannot have a discussion with them. They just want the opinion to be what they think it is. It's fucking maddening. It's fucking maddening. Basically, what everyone is arguing about is the wrong thing. It doesn't even matter what most people on Twitter are actually arguing about, because most people just want to be tribal about it and not. It's because the people that say, for example, that turn-based is dead, is predicated on Final Fantasy most of the time. But then also too, the kind of people that are Final Fantasy should continue being an action game, it's really just all tribalism based on that, based on how people feel about the decision for FF to step away from turn-based. Most people want to use your platform so they can deplatform you from it. I mean, that's essentially what Twitter is, right? Um, it's PvP social media. And I always get on there and I'm like, let's have a conversation, guys. And I always remember this is not the place where you have a conversation. This is the place where you do like a one liner thing. And that one liner is like the thing that that floats to the top, right? It's that own moment. It's that moment where I own you and I say something quippy, and then that makes me get more likes, and then you get BTFO'd, and then there are people that read what you say in bad faith, etc. Prodigy, as you think they'll return to mobile or live service ever? Yeah, I don't think they're gonna like shut down their mobile division, but I do think that their PvP social media might be an all timer quote. Thank you. uh, um, but yeah, so I don't think they're gonna shut down like mobile or live service. I think they're gonna continue to do it, but I also think that so for example, when I'm playing like Persona 5 X recently, which is really cool. I mean, the Subway Slammer is like what the fuck. But playing P5X recently, that game is like a full ass Persona game, right? Like it's not like, oh, this is the Persona Gacha, right? Like you can put that thing on your PC or your phone and soon consoles because it's coming to consoles eventually. And it's like playing a whole ass Persona game. Like it could be Persona 5 too. Right? And it's not just that, but it's also Hoyoverse, which is what kind of led us to this place in the first place. Hoyoverse, and then we had like Weathering Wave and all of these other Chinese gachas that have come out that are really good, that are really high quality, AAA like, stuff that are like top of top tier. And that feel like you paid like $70 for a game, but you got it for free, at least until, at least until the gotcha elements start to come out. And but aside from that, like they're very full quality games. And so whenever you go and play something like Ever Crisis, for example, and this is not to like diss Ever Crisis or anything, but it is to say that it is very much a gotcha from, I don't want to say the past, but it's a very standard gotcha. It's not something that would like blow you away necessarily in the same way that you would from playing these gotcha games that are like full games, like full console games. And so I think that for Square, their future is probably in making that more so than it is making more of the standard type of gotcha. And so I don't think they're going to step away from live service, and I don't think they're going to step away from mobile. Yeah, Prodigy, you put it best. Hoyoverse gets a lot of hate, but they save live service from spending gotcha money on PNGs. Right. Because that's what gotcha was before, is that you spent money on like a PNG. At least now when you pull a character, you pull like an actual like action game character that, at least from my perspective, has a lot more value than like, a fucking PNG. I don't care for gotchas due to the pay model. However, they continue to improve each year. China and Korea are going to be going to be market dominant in a product cycle if the West and Japan don't step up. Uh, that's like 100% true. And like we're kind of headed there at a very fast rate. I think that China and Korea could potentially have maybe the most influence in gaming, period, in 10 years. Completely flipped from the current model, which is like very much the West plus Japan. I think that if Korea and China continue the way things are currently going, yeah, it'll be a a Chinese and Korea dominant industry, and the West and Japan will just kind of exist in small, a little small speck within it. So I honestly find it a bit scary. It is to a large extent, but I mean, because we may not have the same industry anymore, and a lot of things are going to change. I do like a lot of like what the Chinese developers are working on, and I find it very cool. But change can be scary for sure. But hopefully it won't be like it won't be like Japanese games are completely irrelevant anymore or anything like that. The industry I think is big enough, or will be big enough to support China and Korea, but also the West and also Japan, and all of those games, all the regions will be able to thrive, and everyone will be able to make games. But right now, it's really hard for anyone to compete with how good China's output is, and South Korea is also like getting really good really fast. So I don't know. Yeah, so Japan definitely tech wise probably not going to be able to beat China, because I just think that you look at some like recent like Chinese games, and yeah, output and quality, yeah, like the quality that a lot of Chinese studios are able to put out right now and the frequency that they're able to do it is fucking insane. It's the rise of modern gacha models that has me convinced that we probably won't get another FF game anytime soon. Besides the MMO market being volatile to new MMOs, players already have to choose where to spend their time and money, and those live action games are dominating. Right. I mean, that's the problem though too, is that like when we talk about the full priced game having difficulty, it's not that gaming as a whole isn't growing. It's that the place that gaming is actually growing, and what everything is shifting to. And I know no one wants to hear this, because I don't want to hear it either, is that it's all shifting to live service, because that's where the money is. And not only is that where the money is, that's where people are putting their time, which is also money, right? The attention economy. So, people will get online, they'll get on Twitter, and they'll say, how come we don't have, more full price games? Why is everyone trying to cash in on like the live service thing? They'll say that, but then they get off and they go play Genshin for 2 hours a day. And as a result of doing that, and I'm not demonizing you if you play, by the way, I'm just saying if you a lot of them do that, and then they and then a lot of them will not go and play a full priced $70 game, right? Because they go and play their gacha, their service game, their Fortnite, their Genshin. They play that every day. And then they will sometimes stop playing that for a full priced game. But they generally only do that if the full priced game is good enough to pull them away from the gacha for a little while. So, hey NSP, if you don't mind, I highly recommend checking out Moon Channel on why Chinese gacha games lean toward the anime aesthetics known from Japan. He explained a lot of things. Oh, that actually sounds really good. Maybe I'll watch that next time I need a good video essay for the gym. It's my favorite thing to listen to at the gym, is not music but video essays. Let's go ahead and read question 3. It looks like it's about Dragon Quest. Regarding publishing, do you have plans to utilize not only new publications but also past works? For example, a manga published 35 years ago detailing the behind-the-scenes development of Dragon Quest is now out of print and difficult to obtain. This work features famous creators and staff and offers a detailed look at development, which could inspire younger generations and also enhance brand values and sales. With the upcoming HD 2D remakes of Dragon Quest 1 and 2, related works are being reprinted. I hope you will consider digitizing or reprinting this manga as well. As we explained earlier, we want to focus on publishing. Utilizing digital platforms hold great potential. Delivering past works, archives, to customers is also a significant business opportunity. Looking not only at creating new works, but also revisiting past titles to explore their possibilities is important. We will share your valuable opinion with our publishing division. Personally, I'd like to read the work you mentioned. What's the gym routine, bro? Lift 5 days a week and then eat an entire chicken every morning for lunch, breakfast, and dinner. I set that out of order, but you know what I mean. Yeah, I eat not literally a whole chicken, but I probably do eat like an entire chicken worth like each day. Yeah, I'd pretty much say if you add everything together, I eat like at least one whole chicken, probably a day. Protein, because I eat a lot of chicken. So, um, yeah. So every morning I wake up and I go outside, I find a chicken, and I kill that chicken, and then I I eat it. Don't forget your broccoli. Ironically, I do eat it with broccoli. That's actually like exactly like what I eat it with. Um, a chicken per meal? No, I was joking. Like realistically, it's a chicken per day. Um, which by the way, chickens actually do run with their heads cut off. And the reason I know this is not because I personally killed the chicken, although legends say that I did. It's because my grandma actually she used to like she would basically like raise her own chickens and then she would behead the chickens, for dinner and stuff. And so I was staying with my grandma once and I just like watched her behead this chicken. Sickest shit I ever seen. And that's when I found out the expression that running like a chicken without its head off, like or like with its head off, is like real. That's not like something that people made up. She cut the head off of this chicken, and that thing started running, bro. It was running. I promise you, it was running. And I'm not talking about oh, it was like walking a little bit. It dashed across the yard, and someone had to go catch it. It was running, bro. It was running. So anyway, that's how I found out that chickens fucking run when you cut their head off, like for real. You to the chicken, why are you running? And I was like, why are you running? Why did the chicken cross the road and his piece grandma decapitated it? Yeah. So, anyways, now you know. Like a chicken, like running like a chicken without its head on is like a legitimate expression. Because chickens, when you cut their head off, their fight or flight like response is still kicking in. And it's so strong that like their bodies continue basically to run even after they've already been killed, which is really crazy. Anyway, chicken homage. Okay, question 4. I am deeply captivated by the world of the NieR series. Let's fucking go. Me too, King. And enjoy it immensely as a fan. Could you share your future plans for expanding the NieR IP? Personally, I'd be happy if there were future opportunities to play NieR Reincarnation again. I hope that the piano concert currently being held overseas will be made available in Japan. We currently understand your question as expressing your enjoyment of NieR and asking about the possibilities of concerts and playing NieR Reincarnation again. The NieR series has now reached its 15th anniversary and is an important IP for us, cherished by our customers. We will share your opinions with the development team and will consider future developments to meeting your expectations. So like I said, all the Square Enix's answers are going to be like, yes, we will continue to make as much money as possible, and maybe we'll do the thing that you want, but we can't announce anything here. But this is what the stakeholders want. It's cool that there is a stakeholder that does want to see more NieR, and it's also cool that they're interested in seeing reincarnation again. A lot of people tell me that reincarnation is like a fantastic NieR game, but like you literally can't play it. And people said that the gacha was a little bit intrusive on the game when they were playing it. So if we want a new full NieR game, someone needs to lock Yoko Taro in a room. Also, whatever happened to his project with Sega, where he had old Sega games turned into anime girls to fight with against the evil Sega Corporation. I don't know. I do feel that Yoko Taro is working on something. So, like, I think we just got to be a little bit more patient, but I do think he's working on something. I mean, they've more or less teased that he does have a new game in the works. So I do think it's happening. Reincarnation also had a FF14 crossover with Ishikawa about him himself. It did. I never got to play it though. This is how I feel about Ever Crisis: The First Soldier. I want to play it for the story, but I can't get into the gacha. Yeah, and that's a big problem I think with Square. Does NSP ever read his YouTube chat? Yes, bro, I do read it. Uh, um, I do think that First Soldier. I think that what the fuck was I saying? Goddamn, that got me caught off guard. Um, yeah, I hate when single player story games get updates within gachas. I don't think anyone's a fan of that. I think that needs to be kept secret, like separate and not intertwined. You know, I don't think that like if I'm following Kingdom Hearts that I need to go and play Kingdom Hearts gacha to keep up with Kingdom Hearts, for example. Same with Final Fantasy VII Ever Crisis, right? Like I shouldn't need to go play fucking the First Soldier in order to keep up with Final Fantasy VII Retrilogy. I don't think that they need to stop making gachas from a business financial standpoint. I don't think they need to stop making live service games either, even though I would not necessarily want to see live service stuff as much. I just think that they need to not bait it like, oh, you want to see more Final Fantasy VII, then you gotta play the gacha in order to get the next game or something like that. I don't think anyone wants that. Or wants like lore of like single player games to be hidden in a gacha. There are two different audiences, I think, that they should be trying to address with that. Necessary, if that makes sense. But I also think that there's a way to make a gacha for a series and then not have it be like, oh, you need to play this. And again, like I do think that like Persona 5X is kind of a good example of that because it's like P5X is not like, oh, you're not going to understand Persona 6 if you don't play P5X, right? Or something like that. No, it's like it's very much its own thing. And for people who like Persona and people who like Gacha, they can pick it up and start playing it. I hope whatever is coming is not turn-based. I played FF for the story only back then. I don't want to ever return to that. Sorry, we're going back to turn-based. I don't know. I don't know what else to tell you. Do you think the Mana series is dead now, Prince? I don't think Mana is dead. Also, thank you for the super chat. I don't think it's dead, but it's going to be a while before there's a new Mana for sure because the last one didn't perform super well. So I think that they're probably going to put it away. They're probably going to shelve it for a while before they do anything new with it. And then they'll probably try to bring it back out and see if they can revive it. But Mana's probably on a 10-year hiatus is my guess. That's my guess too. Yeah. So, I mean, on the subject of turn based, actually, let's read this next question because I think this is the question. Yeah, this is another question about turn based, and then I'll talk about that. So, this question says, if possible, I would like the latest numbered Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy titles to release alternately each year. I understand that the current policy prioritizes delivering high quality games due to the quality declining when focusing only on quality for mobile titles. While I support prioritizing quality over quantity, I hope you can find a balance. Also, as a fan, I would like a new Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy titles to be command based RPGs. Based. I have heard explanations that action games are the current trend, but this year, a command RPG released by another company received an extremely high Metacritic and user scores and is widely praised among gamers. I hope your company can also create fun command RPGs for new entries in Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy. Um, We understand that your first point is to maintain a balance between quantity and quality when launching new Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy titles, and your second point is that with command-based combat gaining renewed attention, perhaps new titles should adopt it. After the 3 years of restarting our midterm business plan, we are considering not only large titles but diverse media developments, including mobile. There are now many platforms, and especially for Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy, and we are steadily transitioning toward a system that allows us to provide new titles with a balance toward quantity and quality. We ask for your patience as these efforts come to fruition. Additionally, we recognize that command-based combat is an important foundation system for us, and it is something we should continue to value. We will keep your opinions in mind for future development. So this is basically the question that references Expedition 33. Doesn't explicitly state Expedition 33, but it's fairly obvious command-based RPG released by another company with an extremely high Metacritic and user scores and is widely praised among gamers. And then the investor himself, went on Twitter and basically said that the game he was talking about there was Expedition 33. But the way that the media had kind of interpreted this sentence or interpreted what was said was that he basically said, or that Square Enix basically said that they recognize Expedition 33 and plan to make more turn-based games like it or something. As you can clearly see, that's not exactly what was said. Square Enix themselves don't mention Expedition 33 at all in their response, even though, yes, in the question it is referred to, but indirectly, that is. But yeah, in the actual answer itself, it's not like they're saying, like, yeah, we're playing a fuck ton of Expedition 33, and that's what we're doing. They just acknowledge that, yeah, a lot of people love command RPGs, and we're going to make more command RPGs. It doesn't really signify any sort of change in what they're doing. However, I do think, so I asked a question here, because I always do polls on my Twitter just for fun. And I do these polls sometimes to see if the Twitter discourse actually matches, like, what people really feel like. And what's always funny is that a lot of these polls is just because I saw something on Twitter and I was like, I wonder if that's actually true, like broadly true, or if it's just like a group of people with like a sort of contrarian take basically feeding into each other. And so one question I asked was like, you can only play one of these groups of FF games for the rest of your life. Which one are you taking? And like 75% of people said the turn-based Final Fantasy games, and 25% said the action Final Fantasy games. And so that was actually a really interesting poll. There was like another one too that I asked. This one's also kind of worth mentioning too, is that like people talked about how they hated the side quest in Rebirth on Twitter. And then again, I was like, is that really true? So I asked, like, which modern FF has the best side quest? And then Rebirth blew it out. So sometimes I do these polls just to like ground my sanity in if what the Twitter thing to say is like actually how people feel, and like it almost never actually is. In fact, you go on here and maybe it's just my community and maybe it's biased toward my community, but a lot of people in my community vehemently disagree with me on shit. So I don't think that like best part of a pile of shit is still a piece of shit. No modern FF has good side quests. Fair. Okay, I'm not gonna do that. Or I should say, no modern FF has like all good side quests. There are good side quests within them, but you probably wouldn't say that the totality of them is like good side quest. Like all of the Queen's Blood content in Rebirth is like objectively good content. I say objectively to mean super subjectively, but we all fucking agree anyway. But like the Queen's Blood content is like some of the best side content in games. That's like a really fucking solid mini game, right? But then, it's just unfortunate that you also got other stuff in there too. I asked another one too. I thought about. Oh yeah, here it is right here. I had asked, would you like to see the return of Final Fantasy to turn-based, either through a mainline title like FF17 or through an FF subseries dedicated to being like the PS1 games? And so 52% said yes. I got a typo in there. I'd love to see it. I put I've loved to see it. I'll never beat the illiterate allegations, dude. Oh God, I promise I'm not illiterate. I'm actually quite good with words in here. But whenever they come out of my hands or my mouth, I'm like super terrible with them and I misspeak and I make typos all the time. And then I have to go back and like read what I said. I'm like, what the fuck was I saying? And why does all this shit? So I will never beat the illiterate allegations, but I promise I'm actually quite literate. And I actually understand words quite well and I'm good with them whenever it's in my brain. And then whenever it comes out, I reread it. Anyway, so like 52% of people are like, yes, do it. And then 31% said that they're open to the idea. And so really only 17% of people were like, it's either action or bust. Now, that's not to say that like, go back to this for a second. Not to say that like, uh, not to say that they have to do turn-based, but it is to say that there is still a very large portion of the audience willing or wanting turn-based. This was at 4.7k votes. Now, any argument saying that like this is because this is my community and so it's biased to what people who already follow me think, that's fair. Though I would also argue that I am one of the most followed Final Fantasy content creators. And so that also kind of suggests a thing too, if you get what I'm saying. So you can pick that bias apart in the poll all day. I'd be the first to admit that, hey, there's bias in the poll because it's my community. But, again, factoring in that I am a very watched channel by the FF community, it does still sort of suggest that there is some validity to that type of information, to people saying that in such a wide spread way, if that makes sense. Nothing wrong with tooting your own horn in this field. I'm not tooting my own horn, I promise. I promise. I'm trying to just be objective about it. But it would seem like there are a lot of people that do want it to return to turn-based. Anyone who doesn't want FF to do turn-based again is because it will invalidate what many people have said about Square Enix chasing trends for years. I do feel a lot of it is motivated by that. That is not to say that everyone is motivated by that. It's just to say that there are definitely people who are because it's more about the internet pissing competition than it is necessarily about what they would and wouldn't buy. I voted yes, even though Remake Trilogy is my favorite. Okay, but here's the thing, though, too. I think that the reason we love Remake Trilogy combat is because it's still command-based combat. It allows action to happen, but it doesn't get rid of the thing that we like about turn-based, if that makes sense. Command-based, turn-based. I'm using those loosely to describe the umbrella of whatever you would describe Final Fantasy 4 through 9 as. And so, yeah, that's why that system works so well. And that's why people like that system. So I feel like saying that, like, you know, with action versus command-based, even with us saying FF7R system, there is still kind of a part of us saying we do like turn-based, you know, within saying we prefer that system, because otherwise we'd be saying, or more people would be saying that they want 16 system. Now, there are people who are saying that they want 16 system to continue going forward. So there's definitely also that. Like, for sure. There are much smaller percentage of the Final Fantasy community, but there are definitely people who feel that 16's combat is the way to go. So there are people who are actually like, yeah, let's actually do full action for the next games. But I would say that it's probably a decent portion of, maybe a majority of people who would be very excited for a turn-based FF. So in a hypothetical where FF goes turn-based again, say it sells as well as E33. That doesn't help FF currently because those sales are great for E33, because E33 is not a true AAA production. The biggest issue FF has currently is accepting it does not need broad AAA appeal and needs to select a lane, stick to it, and lower costs. I agree. But adding on to that, I would also say that returning to turn-based could potentially be a cost-cutting metric as well. Because there is no turn-based system that costs nearly as much as making icon versus icon fights, for example. Those things were insanely expensive to produce. And it's something that I forget his name, but he was the one who directed the icon fights. And he was like, the amount of money that they needed to make the fights was so insane that he was genuinely surprised that the company approved it, which is what he said. And you also have to keep in mind, too, with those icon versus icon fights, they didn't only have CS3 working on them. They actually had to take the Kingdom Hearts team, and they actually had to use Platinum Games to create the icon fights. And so they had teams even outside of Square, like Platinum, working on these fights, because that's how much work they took. Not to mention any other outsourced partners that they also had on top of it, right? Didn't they suggest that the icon fights took like over half the development budget, or am I pulling that out of my non-existent ass? I don't actually know for sure if they said anything like that, but they have indicated that the icon fights were by far the most expensive aspect of the whole game. So Whether it would actually equate to half of the game's development budget, I don't know. But they have not been like shy about saying that shit was fucking expensive to make, and is easily the most expensive part of the whole game. So I would not be surprised if we did see like an actual breakdown of the fights, and we found out that they were like that they were literally half of the budget. Like, and it would actually explain a lot of things too, like why some of the side quest cutscenes are like that, and also main quest cutscenes. Um, it just depends. Expedition 33 sold well because it is not FF. Expedition 33 doesn't have expectations that FF has in a divided fan base. I mean, to some extent, right? But that I would say that didn't historically stop FF from selling really well. But also, too, you have to think the fan base really got divided post 10. But you also have to think, whose fault is that? Right? Like, who kept creating multiple different games that appealed to multiple different people and didn't want to be like the best? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, Square kind of created that scenario themselves. They kind of made a situation where the natural outcome of what was going to happen was, of course, that people were going to be at each other's throats, because they basically, after 10, they kind of didn't stick to a thing, and they made so many different things for so many different people, and they validated all of those people and told them, like, yes, this is the new thing. And so now all those people are at each other's throats for what they want next with the series. And so I don't want the typical turn-based. I want a hybrid system like Rebirth or something innovative like Expedition 33. Chris, thank you so much for the super chat. I agree. I want something cool. It can't just be like PS1 ATB again. It would actually have to be a really innovative, cool system that looks really cinematic because it's Final Fantasy, and it has to be something that plays great. So I do think an evolution of Tin's system would be the best place to go, purely because I think that was like the strongest Final Fantasy turn-based that ever been. Tin 2 is also, I would say that Tin 2 is kind of a place to look, but then I think that 13 pulled a lot from Tin 2, but then 13 also kind of lost a lot of what was good about Tin 2 somehow, strangely, in its combat. Not to say that 13's combat is bad. I just think that 13's combat is better and is like a better version of like a very similar thing, if that makes sense. What about something like Lost Odyssey's gameplay? I like Lost Odyssey's gameplay naturally, but I think I like Final Fantasy X's combat better than Lost Odyssey. Yeah, Expedition 33 is selling really well. I think that like we look at like 3.3 million right now, and that's kind of like what people are focused on. But if you actually look at the word of mouth and you look at the fact that the game is available on Game Pass for no cost, and the fact that Game Pass has 35 million subscribers, Expedition 33 probably, has like a total of 7 or 8 million players, actually. Like if you actually break the numbers down. If it wasn't on Game Pass, I think it probably would have sold like 5 or 6 million by now if it wasn't on there. But the fact that it is definitely cannibalized some of the sales. And so the 3.3 million within that time span, and the fact that you can just download it, that 35 million people can just access it without paying for it, and it still sold 3.3 million, that's pretty fucking ridiculous, man. So Yeah, I would say that if we actually had like a players metric for Expedition 33, it's probably like 8 million players or something like that, and 3.3 million people bought it. So that's pretty fucking good. Because everyone I know who has Game Pass like immediately went and checked it out. So yeah, as much as people will hate me for saying this, you can trace a lot of Square Enix's issues back to FF7, the first AAA game, the game that cemented SE's auteur culture, which leads to the years of memes over Nomura. It was 7 that they then milked to death with projects of varying quality that only further created these harsh divides among FF fans and only 7 fans. Then had Evil East Alliance, Fabula Nova Crystallis, etc. Right. Yeah, I don't think it's so much that like FF7 like fucked them over so much as like their response to FF7 was wrong, if that makes sense. Like that wasn't like necessarily the correct way to respond, and most of that was Yoichi Wada, who was like, "Why are we making all of these games and then not capitalizing on them?" And so, he came up with like, he's like, "Okay, let's do Fabula Nova Crystallis. Let's do the compilation of Final Fantasy VII." Right? So, really, what should have been done to expand on Final Fantasy VII is that, okay, instead of doing the compilation, do a proper Final Fantasy VII too. Or don't do the compilation, but start Final Fantasy VII Remake on PS3, right? And so, yeah, I mean, yeah, I think we basically agree that basically is really just their response and like the way Yoichi Wada took it, which was essentially to make slop, as opposed to as opposed to like, okay, there are people that want more 7. We should do the remake now rather than like doing 20 years worth of compilation slop and then doing a remake like later on when the demand for it is not near its peak like it was like in 2005 when the PS5 PS3 FF7 tech demo came out. FF is like the Sonic fan base where the franchise has been so many things over the years that there's no definitive agreement on how to move forward with it from fans. Yeah. So the way Sakaguchi used to do this is that Sakaguchi would essentially say anything that wasn't Final Fantasy enough or that didn't fit the Final Fantasy brand would become its own IP, right? So at the time, it was like, oh, you want action Final Fantasy? Then we'll make Mana, right? You want, like Xenogears, right? For example, was a pitch for Final Fantasy VII. He's like, doesn't fit the Final Fantasy brand, but we're going to give you money and we're going to allow you to go make that game anyways, right? Like Parasite Eve, another pitch for Final Fantasy VII. Didn't fit the brand, so he was like, okay, we're going to make this as its own IP, and it's going to be Parasite Eve. Now what happens is the opposite, where the new experimental thing becomes the Final Fantasy mainline title, and the thing that's like Final Fantasy becomes Bravely Default. All right. So it's become the reverse, where the new thing, the experimental thing that's out there that may not fit the brand, is becoming the brand, and then the thing that's like Final Fantasy is like some other new title that is like an HD 2D game. And so when Sakaguchi was running things, it was the opposite, right? There was things that they felt were Final Fantasy and that Final Fantasy should push in certain directions. And now Final Fantasy is kind of open to just be anything. But it also means, but it means that in being anything, it's hard to build a base because you're always going to have attrition each time because some people are going to be like, excuse me, some people are going to be like, well, I don't like a hack and slash. I want turn based to come back. Where at least when they had a format of like, this is our style of game where it's turn based and we have a world map and we have all these other things, you might like Final Fantasy VII and then you may not like Final Fantasy VIII, for example. I like Final Fantasy VIII, just to be clear. I'm just using this as an example. But the way that you don't like Final Fantasy VIII is going to be different than how you don't like Final Fantasy 15. I don't know if that makes sense. But like, does that make sense? Like the way in which I don't like Final Fantasy, like, actually, I wouldn't even, I still wouldn't even say I necessarily hate 13. I have a lot of issues with 13. I still probably wouldn't say I hate it. But the way that like I feel about Final Fantasy 13 is different than how I feel about like an extraction shooter because I don't play that shit. Does that make sense? It gets further and further removed from the thing that it's supposed to be or the thing that you're wanting from it. And even if it's still good, technically, it's still like it's not the same high that I'm wanting from the series, if that makes sense. I don't know. I'm just mouthing off right now. Playing FF8 again recently, and when you know how that game works, it's just annoying to play. Yeah, don't kill monsters and learn how to turn enemy encounters off with Diablos, and just play cards to max level, max your stats. Fun. FF8 is like most fun when you play it super inoptimally. You just kind of like play it however, because if you start playing it optimally and then it sucks, it like punishes you for doing that. But if you just play it like casually and enjoy yourself with it, you'll have a lot of fun. So yeah, you just have to like not play FF8 with like the mindset of having the best shit and being like the most powerful, which is very hard to do for an RPG. And I get the criticisms of FF8 and they're not wrong. I just think that like despite all that, the game is still pretty tight. Anyway, let's move on to question 6. Regarding Dissidia Final Fantasy Opera Omnia, which ended its mobile service, although you said making it offline is difficult, are there any plans to release it on devices like Nintendo Switch 2? We understand your question as asking whether there is potential for porting Dissidia Final Fantasy Opera Omnia to other devices, even if offline play is difficult. For titles after service termination, we are always considering various possibilities internally. We will take your opinion as valuable input for future consideration. I know a lot of you loved Opera Omnia, so hopefully that does happen. You're right. The first time I played FF8, I focused on drawing everything and I hated it. And then when I went back to playing it normally, it was great. Yeah. So when I first played FF8, I played it super fucking inoptimally because, I played FF8 like later on. So I didn't play it like first came out. I played FF8 when I was like 17. So for the first time. And I didn't really like look up a guide or anything because I didn't think that like Final Fantasy games were hard enough to like really need guides for the most part. So I was just like, I could just play this. And so I just played FF8 as a game. And I thought it was sick as fuck. Like I was like, FF8's cool. And it actually wasn't until that I did go and find stuff because I was like, okay, I played this game raw the first time. I'm missing like half the Guardian forces. So I, I went and looked this shit up. And then I started finding out how you were actually supposed to play FF8. And then that kind of poisoned the game for me. which is very fucking funny. Yeah, so anyway, just play FF8 normal, bro. Don't play FF8 good. I promise you. You'll fucking love FF8 if you just play it like ass. If you play it good though, you'll think it sucks. Just play it normal. Is NSP in his 30s? Yes, I turned 34 like in a few months. So don't draw magic. Don't draw too much magic. Just draw enough magic. Like that's what I was doing. Like I didn't know how much magic to actually draw, so I would just casually draw magic sometimes whenever I was doing encounters, right? I wouldn't like sit there and like max out each stat if that made sense. I would just like draw a little bit of magic and then I'd keep going. And that also kept the game like a bit challenging too. So I was able to get like a more engaging game too. I don't know. Sometimes I play games suboptimally because it's just more fun to play them suboptimally. Like when I played Sekiro, I didn't use the prosthetics really at all. Don't get me wrong, a lot of those prosthetics were like incredibly valuable. I just thought it was more fun to just figure out how to fucking parry it. Do the fucking perfect parry. So sometimes like, and not to say that like you should like handicap yourself in games to make them fun, and that's your responsibility and not the game designers, etc. But like sometimes it can make the game like, you know, a little bit more engaging for you. Okay, number 7. Even after the recent stock split, share prices remain in the 300,000 yen range. Many individual investors who love games support the company. Stock splits are an effective shareholder return measure and provide benefits in liquidity and capital gains. Given this, are there any future plans to return measures under consideration? We really don't give a fuck about this, honestly. We'll skip that one. Not really relevant to us. This one definitely is, though. I believe Final Fantasy XIV's Endwalker's high quality led to strong expectations for Dawntrail. However, I feel that after Dawntrail, the quality of content, particularly in patches, has declined, leading to user attrition. There are also concerns that despite Mr. Yoshida remaining as as producer and director, sufficient resources are not being allocated to the title, and there are worries about the studio's organizational structure. As a shareholder, I am concerned about how the current situation will affect future earnings, since Final Fantasy XIV is a key revenue source. While your midterm business plan calls for a shift from quantity to quality and optimizing the development environment, how do you intend to improve things within Creative Studio 3? Oh boy. And they actually gave a lengthy answer on this one, so we understand your comment as expressing concern that since the transition from Endwalker, content quality, including patches, may have declined, and questioning whether, quote, Mr. Yoshida as director and producer is unable to devote sufficient resources to the title, and asking for our potential impacts to future earnings. Currently, Final Fantasy XIV is taking on new challenges, including refreshing its storyline as it transitions from Endwalker to Dawntrail. With a view towards the next 10 years, the entire development team is working with full commitment. We ask for your continued warm support as we proceed toward 8.0, 9.0, and beyond. We will share your comments with the development team. Regarding your concern that Mr. Yoshida may not be able to dedicate enough time to the title, we believe that creators and development managers, including Mr. Yoshida, gain valuable ideas through their involvement with other titles, and these experiences can feed back positively into Final Fantasy XIV. That said, as there are limits as to what any one person can handle, We will convey your comments to Mr. Yoshida directly to Mr. Yoshida. We will continue to strive to meet your expectations for Final Fantasy XIV. Note, regarding statements made during general meeting of shareholders, there have been instances of information being shared on social media in ways that can differ from the facts or only partially, leading to misunderstandings. We have posted summaries to reflect the overall context and intent of this statement on our website. We encourage you to refer to these for more accurate understanding. It's very funny that they put that on this one and not on the turn-based one, because the turn-based one is like the one that blew up. And like, I don't think too many people like really cared about this one. Well, I'm sure some of the Final Fantasy XIV creators definitely cared about this one. Gotta be real, Walker patch quality was pretty shit as well. FF14 needs to focus on getting interesting patch content out much earlier in patch cycles. People shouldn't be waiting over a year to do things like the new Eureka/Baja zone, because if you don't raid, what is there to do in the game for a fucking year? Yeah, there's nothing. There's like absolutely nothing. So, and then another problem too that 14 kind of ran into is that if you're an MSQ Andy, like me, the story in 6.XX was shit to me. Like, it was bad. Like, I'm like, why are we just doing Final Fantasy IV again? And it was the first time that I really felt that low about FF14 throughout the whole experience. It was lower than me for like a Realm Reborn, if I'm honest, with like 6.XX. And then I started playing Dawn Trail, and I was just like, I'm not into this. And I just stopped. And I stopped really early too, because everything I had seen of 6.XX, I was just like, dude, this fucking blows to me. Like, I just don't care about Wook Lamont and like all this shit that's happening. So, I kind of bailed out. That's not to say that Wook is necessarily bad. Maybe if I continue playing, I would have come to love Wook. But from when I had played, I had really just checked out. So, I don't know. When 8.0 comes out, I'll finish it. We'll probably stream it all. And also, it really didn't help that people were saying that it was bad uniformly. It really, really, really did not help. Like, everyone was saying that, like, yo, Dawn Trail's not it. And so I was kind of like discouraged from wanting to play more. So the Metacritic was also pretty low too, like 79, which is the lowest piece of FF14 content post 1.0. So that also was really not encouraging. And then my experience with 6.x was so bad that I just couldn't bear like wanting to go through Dawn Trail that much. I still love FF14 though. It's still one of my favorite FF games of all time. But I do think that they probably kind of shit the bed a little bit. Okay, I'm gonna be real. I know this is probably a hot take, but I kind of want FF14 to stay away from like FF. I know that sounds insane. Let me just bear with me for a second. I'm kind of fucking tired of the like FF nostalgia in FF14. Like, I'm actually like really over it at this point. I kind of just want them to focus on like being a new original Final Fantasy game and not being like, hey guys, do you remember Final Fantasy IX? Do you remember Final Fantasy III? Yes, bro. Be you though. Be you. Don't be Final Fantasy 9 or 3 or 6 or 7. Just like be normal. Be normal. Don't be FF8. Just be Final Fantasy 14. Be the new latest Final Fantasy expansion that is a different new experience. And so it actually kind of got to a point of where, and especially in 6.x with like the FF4 stuff, which was way too fucking much FF4 stuff, where I actually would like find myself internally groaning every time I would see like all the the references. I think the references peaked for me with Shadowbringers, right? With Shadowbringers is like when like all the FF references peaked for me. I enjoyed them in Endwalker, right? Like we're going from like Dark Knight to Paladin and stuff like that. It made sense. But like it going on after that, I felt like I was just like, dude, oh god, dude, I'm so done. I feel like they have milked the FF well or the FF cow in FF 14 as much as they possibly can. There is like no reference that I'm going to care about going forward. I do think it'd be cool if they are going to do it, then like maybe if they could move on to like the more modern FFs because there's more untouched stuff there to reference and update, right? So if the next expansion like brings in Final Fantasy 13 stuff or even more 10 stuff cuz 10 is like referenced one of the least. That would be cool, right? Like if the next expansion is themed around like 15 or something, that would also be cool because there's not much of that in the game. But in terms of like FF1 through 12 minus 10, there is so much shit in there that is like, I know I've played Final Fantasy before, right? Like I'm good, brother. I'm good. Give me the new thing. The new thing is like what I play Final Fantasy for in that way, right? Like I want the new story experience. Or something obscure like Mystic Quest. Yeah. I really don't know what they could do with FF15. Yeah, probably not much. So that is to say that like I would rather them chill on like FF references and stuff for like 14 going forward. I'm so kind of done with that. And like seeing that they're like digging up 9 for Dawn Trail and then they're going to dig up like another Final Fantasy again. They'll probably do Final Fantasy 4 again or they'll be like, oh, this one's gonna be like Final Fantasy V themed, and I'm just gonna check out like immediately because I'm just gonna, and not to say that I don't like FF5, I'm just using that arbitrarily, but I'm gonna check out because I would kind of rather FF14 just be new, like just be like, this is not referencing a thing, like we're just gonna do like it's entirely new proprietary stuff. Honestly, this is a thing that I like about FF11 more than I like about Final Fantasy more than I like about Final Fantasy 14 is that in FF11 there is a lot more. I mean FF11 is like entirely original. And all 14 kind of does is just like reference 11 a ton. And so I would kind of rather see it like go down the FF11 path and just be like, yeah, this is like the new thing that like is completely different. And I still love some of the FF14 references, especially the lesser known ones. Like the Ruins of Ronka and Shadowbringers literally has a secret of mana box art midway through the dungeon. Or, you know, the one so many don't even know, like the Palace of Dead is from fucking Tactics Ogre. A game Yoshi P adores, which is why he loves Montano. Yeah, stuff like that is like kind of cool. But it's just like, I guess some of the like the more overbearing stuff is like where I'm like literally remaking Final Fantasy IV in like the middle of in the middle of what do you call it? The Endwalker, post Endwalker. Number 9 is a very based question, chat. Regarding a remake or a remaster of Chrono Trigger, if you are considering it, how is it positioned within your midterm business plan? We understand your question as asking about whether remakes or remaster such as Chrono Trigger are considered within our midterm business plan. As these evolve in the pipeline, we will refrain from specific comments at this time. However, as we view remakes and remasters as an important way to deliver past titles to more customers, and we value them as a means of engaging our audience. For titles that receive high expectations, we consider daily how best to bring them to market, and we'll continue to take your opinion into account. Chrono Trigger Remaster confirmed. When does Square release the next FF MMO, FF18? I don't know, actually. Like, maybe a Gacha would be like the best philosophy. I don't know, because I think that, like, do you do another MMO is like the first question that I would think to ask. Do you do another one? I don't know if that's the correct course of action, right? Because I think that there is a fair argument that instead of doing another FF MMO, the appropriate course of action is for CS3 to develop a Final Fantasy Genshin like, right? And maybe it has like Final Fantasy 16 inspired combat or something. I'm just, throwing stuff out there. But that's a possible avenue as well, and that can generate as much or more money than a new MMO, right? And it could also actually grow the franchise as well. So I don't know if the appropriate course of action there is develop a new Final Fantasy MMO, right? Because even if they made a new Final Fantasy MMO, could it ever be bigger than 14 or how 14 was at peak? I don't think it can. And also a new MMO definitely jeopardizes FF14 for sure, right? Because if they put out a new MMO, that could seriously run the risk of killing FF14 for numerous reasons. So I don't know if that's a good idea. The MMO landscape is not good right now. MMO players are too ingrained in their comfort games with decades of content to do. Every new MMO coming out either has too little for these players to do or are way too ambitious in scale. MMOs are kind of fucked in the long run because they cannibalize themselves. Yeah. Well, yeah, I think put simply is how many new MMOs do you see coming out are succeeding? I see most of them failing. Actually, not even most of them failing. I would say that like almost all of them have basically failed. They either are on life support right now or no one cares or they're done, right? Like, so how many big new MMOs are coming out that are really making a good impression? I don't think there's many. Chrono Odyssey is up to an ass start. Yeah, Chrono Odyssey is getting shit on. I don't know how the Dune MMO is doing. I think Ashes of Creation will flop. Probably so. New World. Does anyone fucking play New World anymore? Is that a thing? What about that one Korean MMO that everyone was talking about for a while? What was that called? People love the character create. Lost Ark. Lost Ark. That's the one. Does anyone give a fuck about Lost Ark anymore? No, right? MMOs are a dying genre in a few years. The main audience is that of people that loved MMORPGs is in 2000 to 2006. That kind of was like the MMO like peak, right? Fish Fry Cat, hello. What's up, buddy? So I just don't know if you can put out like a new MMO right now and it do really well. But also, one thing you guys got to consider is that the success of the Final Fantasy MMOs, they took off due to the strength of the brand, right? So there was a lot of people playing Final Fantasy games and loved Final Fantasy. So it was a very safe time when 11 and 14 first came out, barring what happened with 14 1.0, obviously, which is part of what kind of got us into this situation. But, like, you know, Final Fantasy's brand name was super strong at that time. And so now we're at the point where Final Fantasy's brand name isn't as strong. And so whether people will play a brand new FF MMO, the certainty is not nearly as high relative to the amount of investment that it would take to create a brand new Final Fantasy MMO. So it is hard for me to then say that I think, oh, they should create a new MMO, or that is like an appropriate course of action for them. A better course of action might honestly be a Final Fantasy Genshin like. In part because MMOs are just, it's harder for them to take off. Also, in part because Final Fantasy XIV Final Fantasy XIV has already, it's still a thing and people are still playing it. And right now it's at a lower point, but can it get back to a higher point? Maybe. Maybe if they put out some good expansions. And then third, this is kind of just where the market is moving right now. It's moving toward these AAA gacha style games. I would actually play an FF Genshin slash Wuwa. Yeah, I think a lot of people would. And I think that would also be like a better brand building move. A new FF MMO shouldn't even be branded FF, to be honest. So, I mean, the FF branding works because, it gives games a good push, right? There are a lot of people that wouldn't necessarily play a game unless it was called Final Fantasy, right? Like the argument that, if they didn't call Final Fantasy 16 Final Fantasy, it would have done better. I'm actually not sure about that because there's a lot of people that just would not play a hack and slash game ever. And not because they necessarily have anything against hack and slashes, but maybe that's just not the type of genre that they play. But because it was specifically called Final Fantasy, they played it. I don't think I would have ever played FF14 if it wasn't called Final Fantasy. I would have just been like, Square Enix has an MMO. And that's cool. I don't play MMOs. And so, yeah. FF Genshin could even get a turn-based gacha like a Honkai Star Rail. Yeah, no, for sure. For sure. And people would love that shit. They would love it. So, yeah, I don't think that's out of the question whatsoever. I think that that's what their mobile division needs to become. Otherwise, they're going to be kind of left in the dust because that's kind of what live service games are doing now in terms of quality. So, there was another thing I wanted to touch on with this, and that was the perception that Yoshida working on titles other than Final Fantasy XIV could be causing the decline in Final Fantasy XIV. Not my perceived decline, but this particular shareholder's perceived decline of FF14. With them saying that there are also concerns that Mr. Yoshida remaining as producer and director, sufficient resources are not being allocated to the title, and there are worries about the studio's organizational structure. So I think that's to say that he's concerned that Creative Studio 3 is working on too much shit, right? We don't know who's working on Final Fantasy IX Remake, but it is possible that that falls under Creative Studio 3's jurisdiction and that they may have some team working on it. We actually don't know who's working on it. Last we heard, rumor-wise, it had been moved internal. So somewhere in either CS 1, 2, or 3 is being worked on, but we just don't know. I wish they would release their Dragon Quest Pokemon Go clone that is just Japanese exclusive and already makes them billions of dollars. Let me pay Square. I think that Dragon Quest actually, over the next few years, is going to end up becoming a big IP in the West. I think that they just haven't done enough with Dragon Quest here in the West to make it, to market it to Westerners. But I think that if you look at the popularity of Dragon Ball and like general Akira Toriyama art in the West, and just how popular Akira Toriyama's art is in the West, it seems to reason that there is some type of way for Dragon Quest to gain a lot of popularity here in the West, right? I don't know what that move is to make it, but if Akira Toriyama's art is already popular here, and turn-based Final Fantasy is already popular here, and Persona is already popular here, and other turn-based JRPGs like this can get really popular in the West, right? There's a lot of fuel, right? There's fuel all over. There just needs to be like a match that gets like struck that sets the whole thing on fire, because the potential actually for Dragon Quest to be popular in the West seems very obvious to me, right? Again, Toriyama's art is huge. Plenty of Westerners have been looking for that high fidelity kind of turn-based game, and they loved Expedition 33 for it. Dragon Quest XI also gained a lot of attention in the West because a lot of Westerners were looking for something like that from FF. Because when I played Dragon Quest XI, dude, I was like, I fucking wish there was a Final Fantasy game like this. I did. I'm sorry, chat. When I played DQ11, all I could think is like, man, goddamn, do I wish there was like a new FF game that like looked and played like Dragon Quest XI. Because I was like, this is that shit that I've been wanting for FF to do for a really long time, and it hasn't done. The way the zones were made, the combat, just the general fun of the journey, and I was just like, man. Go off on a small tangent here while I'm thinking about it too. Is a lot of the times when people say that they miss turn-based Final Fantasy, what they're actually describing is not even necessarily like that they miss turn-based combat. What they actually miss is a lot of the supporting gameplay systems and story formats that turn-based combat provided, and that the action games simply have not even attempted to do, and have not adapted tremendously, like haven't really adapted successfully too much. The closest thing that gets there is Re-Trilogy combat, but even then, Re-Trilogy's gameplay loop is still not quite exactly like feeling like how Super Nintendo and PS1 era FF games did. Is still kind of different, right? But there was a sort of gameplay and cutscene loop to those games that is different than like what all the action games are, right? Like, if you were to take Final Fantasy 16 or 15, for instance, right? It's not just that they swapped out the combat system for a different combat system, right? It's that the overarching like gameplay experience and the supporting systems with the turn-based was completely different. You can have a command-based game that also still remove those systems, by the way. Final Fantasy XIII was kind of a game that did that, where it removed a lot of what people enjoyed about FF's like kind of loop. It changed it, but it was still command based and people hated it. And a lot of the dislike for it came from how they fucked with those supporting systems. 100%. The one thing I love of turn-based games is items and equipments and the characters actually wearing them. I wish FF would lean into it more. That'd be cool if they showed the accessory, I think. But yeah, like somehow it feels like they removed Final Fantasy from Final Fantasy. Yeah, I mean, those supporting systems were kind of what people liked the most, I think, about the turn-based games. And so, and it's hard to even necessarily describe what I'm all talking about, but like, just like the zone structure and even the way the random encounters were structured, and it's really hard to describe like what all these systems and the itemizations and all those elements together and how they made like the game feel. But it stopped after 10. And it's one of the reasons why, even though 10 is different, it feels like it still had most of those underlying elements to the game, minus just like a world map, which is like probably the biggest change about 10, I would say, from like the meta perspective of the Final Fantasy gameplay loop. It's been enough time. Let Tri-Ace make FF17. The real ones, fucking no. It'd be either the single best FF game ever or a massive flop. No, no in between. That would be fucking insane, brother. 16's equipment system and overall item system was terrible. I think that like, and you guys can, I mean, feel free to always disagree with me, obviously, because I welcome, people to disagree with me in these chats, because this is how I form my own thoughts, and sometimes you guys provide better thoughts than I can think of. But I think, to me, maybe the single most important thing about like the Final Fantasy gameplay identity is my ability to like lose to a boss and then go back into a menu and then click on some different shit and then annihilate the fucking boss. I think that is like the single most important thing that like a Final Fantasy game can do from a gameplay identity perspective that makes me feel like it's Final Fantasy. Maybe I'm totally off base with that. I know some people can argue that that's just like a general RPG thing, but I always thought that the way FF did that was always like really interesting and really fun. And so I think if I can't go back into a menu and click on some shit and then like beat the boss, then I feel like it's failed to me as like what an FF game is like supposed to do. That's kind of like the big thing for me. Can I go click some shit in the menu and come out with a better build and shit, and then I annihilate the boss? That to me is like the fundamental gameplay experience. And so I guess with like, if you say like 15 or 16, you really can't do that. You definitely can't do that in like 16, for example. And so I do think that it should have that feeling of a rewarding build system and satisfying strategy. Now, I hate the word strategy in the context of FF. I do, because a lot of people are like, FF was never strategic. FF games are like pretty easy for the most part, but I actually think that it's not that like you need like the deepest level of strategy ever in order for the game to be good. It just needs a level of strategy that makes the player think enough to engage with the mechanics. All right. Or to feel rewarded for doing so in order for the game to feel good. So, yeah. And I think that, like, I think that I lost what I was saying. I know it's off topic, but Star Ocean 3 Remake leaned into the Black Mirror aspect of story. Hell, taking a lot of influence from Black Mirror would be awesome, but I digress. No, I agree. 16 biggest problem to me was the complete lack of any build crafting. It's just an action game where the RPG part was pure window dressing. Yeah. Oh yeah, no, now I know what I'm talking about with strategy. Yeah, like it doesn't need to be like, oh, this is the deepest strategy game ever, where you have to like come up with this insane strategy in order to win. I don't think that was ever necessary. Again, it just needed to be strategic enough to really get you to think about the puzzle solving in the fight and be memorable and be really engaging. Like it does not need to be like uh the deepest level of like strategy RPG ever. Most people don't need that. Most people just need like a little bit of challenge, like a little bit of I died 2 or 3 times on the boss. What can I do differently with my build? And then go into the menu and figure out with the tools that they have how they can beat the boss. And then they're like, oh, okay. Yeah, and chat is mentioning Final Fantasy X a lot, and chat, you're 100% correct. Because FF10, and that's why FF10 was such a fucking good game, right? Because FF10's not brutally hard. We had no deaths on our FF10 playthrough until the final boss, where Broska's final Aeon clapped my cheeks because I didn't do any in-game content really because we were just doing a stream playthrough. But Final Fantasy X, again, it's not like the hardest video game ever. Now, I say this now, of course. Now, where I have like a fully developed frontal lobe and my attention span is better and I'm able to understand game mechanics a lot better. If I was, you know, like the first time I was playing this when I was like 12 or 13 or something like that, I I thought Final Fantasy X was actually hard as fuck. Um, because the design of FF10 is good, that's why you learned it. Well, yeah, exactly. FF peaked at 10, simple but satisfying strategic elements. Right, right. That should be the best way to describe like what I think FF combat should be. Simple but satisfying strategic elements. Right? It's not like it has to be like the deepest level of strategy ever. And I think that's what people miss whenever they kind of make the argument that like, oh, well, uh, Final Fantasy turn-based games essentially were uh, mindless because you just hit attack button and then that's how you won. I'm like, I guess, but like at the very least, they would allow you to engage with the fight in such a way where winning those fights took you doing some puzzle solving and rewarded you for experimenting with different builds and would make the fight much easier whenever you followed the mechanics, which was rewarding to do. Hey NSP, when do you think that Part 3 will realistically release? Late 2016, 2016, late 2026, early 2027. Yoshi P made a great comparison to what you described. What you basically want is more dynamic, engaging gameplay. He said in an interview that they felt like they removed too much stress. Right. And due to less stress, there's no reason to ever engage with the game systems. Right. And that's the problem, right? Is that it's basically whenever I look at something like, say, 15 or 16. Not that those combat systems are nearly in the same tier list. Don't get me wrong, 16 is way better than 15 to play. But they don't require you engaging with the game. Engaging with the game is essentially an option that you can do. But at the very least, the turn-based FFs were like, you have to engage with this in order to win. And yeah, it was simple to engage with. It wasn't like a very complicated thing, to do, to go into menus and change stuff. But at the very least, making you do a simple thing, some simple things, to at least try to pretend to be strategic, ends up feeling, like you're engaging with the game and that you're doing something. And when you take that away, it kind of just feels like the game will let you win no matter what. That's from an RPG perspective, right? Of course. And if you're looking at those games from like a hack and slash perspective, then yeah, maybe you would grade them like an entirely different way. And that's fair. But I think that, of course, you have to have consideration for the core audience. And if you don't have consideration for that core audience, then it's gonna be divisive for some. I mean, for me, if they continue to make each game a hack and slash without RPG elements that are like really essential and crucial, then I don't know if FF would be able to sustain my interest long term, in full honesty, because I'm just not nearly as interested in that from a Final Fantasy game. You FF10 lovers are going to have a field day with Trails and you finally give it a try. Yeah, no, for sure. For sure. Like, it's got, like, really cool stuff, like the positioning and the AoEs. Yeah, I'm really excited to give it a shot. A game with many random encounter fights and turn-based needs to have weak fodder and easy strat to learn. Otherwise, it'll be exhausting if every fight is hard, right? The game needs to let the player build confidence and then crush it with hard boss battles, but also fodder to level up and grind. Yeah. And 10 just does it the fucking best, man. Let's do these last two questions. Regarding, I think it's two. Yeah, it's just two. Regarding IR conferences, if there are any prospects for resuming them or considering our ongoing considerations, please share. Also, I love games from Team Asano and hope for new IPs from them. We understand your question as inquiring about prospects for resuming IR conferences and express hope for new IPs from Team Asano. While we cannot promise a resumption at this time, we'll consider it as one of the many options for shareholder engagement. Creating new IPs is not easy, but we will convey your expectations to the team, to Asano team. And then finally, I understand that 3D Investment Partners, an investment fund, has acquired a large amount of your stock and now holds over 10%. What kinds of proposals do you expect from them going forward? We understand your question as asking what kind of proposals might be expected from shareholders who have filed substantial shareholder reports. As the issuing the company, we are not in a position to comment on the intentions of individual shareholders, so we'll refrain from answering. Of course. Yeah. So, I mean, like I said, all of these answers from Square Enix are non-answers, but the reason I think that this is good to read anyways is because it lets you know what the people who are putting money into Square Enix have to say. And I do think it is also good that we have two questions that are asking, why aren't you making a turn-based Final Fantasy? For people who are hoping for a turn-based Final Fantasy, because that's good. Because I don't think we had that previously, where people were asking about a turn-based Final Fantasy. And the games that were loosely referenced, but not explicitly, seem to be, one, Square Enix's own Dragon Quest III HD 2D. It seems to be Baldur's Gate 3, and it also seems to be Expedition 33. That that kind of seem to be indirectly referenced by the shareholders here. So I think it would be cool. What would be funny but also annoying with the FF turn-based situation is that the shareholders have been wanting it all this time, and SC themselves were preventing that. No, I think that 100% the shareholders previously were like, you need to make this an action game, and I think we got a lot of indirect indications that shareholders wanted Final Fantasy to be an action game for a really long time. The thought process on wanting FF to go action essentially was that basically there are a lot of people that play Final Fantasy, right? But there are a lot of people that won't play it because it's a turn-based game. So the thought is, if you make Final Fantasy an action game, and yes, there will be some drama, but if the people who end up liking it are liking Final Fantasy, still buy Final Fantasy and don't go away just because it became an action game, and you attract new people into the series because they would not play a turn-based game, then you just blow the whole fucking series up, right? Like, that's the train of thought. And on paper, that makes a lot of fucking sense, right? Like, that's a very logical argument. That's like, well, yeah, what could go wrong there? It sounds like a thing that's almost hard to refute, even. Just theoretically speaking. The problem is that it hasn't, like, actually worked out like that. Have you heard of the Stop Killing Games petition going on in the EU? What are your thoughts? I wonder how SE will go about this if things change. I am not educated enough on Stop Killing Games yet to fully speak on it. So allow me to do a little bit more research, and then maybe I'll talk about it. Because I've actually been thinking about doing a little bit of a deep dive into it to make a video on it even. But we'll see. But I think the initiative sounds really cool from everything I've read on it. I've seen some arguments on Stop Killing Games that it's bad. I've seen arguments that it's good. I need to do a little bit more investigation on it before I have a stance. I know people are really mad at Pirate Software for like being against it and potentially having spread some misinformation about it. So, yeah. If you gain 2 million but lose 1 million, you are still up 1 million. That was the thought process. Exactly. Right? That's what they were thinking. And like logically speaking, that fucking makes sense. Because before all this happened, it was easy to just think like, look, anecdotally, there's all these people that would love to play Final Fantasy, but won't play it because it's a turn-based game. They're like, oh, fuck, I'm not playing that shit because it's turn-based. And, it seemed like, well, fuck, if we make it action and we keep most of our turn-based people, then think about how much the series would grow. So I don't even fault SE actually for like really thinking about this at all. So core thing to keep in mind with Stop Killing Games is especially for an American, it isn't proposing ironclad law. That's not how proposals to European governments work. It is bringing forward an idea and proof enough people care, then lawmakers who it is their jobs to make proper laws and will research and draft ideas around. That's something so many fail to grasp. Right. I guess the only concern with that would be that like lawmakers who don't play games would be ultimately deciding on some laws. So that definitely still has potential to be scary. But I would still say that I agree that that doesn't mean that we shouldn't push forward with laws that help the preservation of games. Which is also why I think we need to make laws that ensure digital purchases are guaranteed in some way. Right? Because right now, our problem, right now, we definitely have a problem with digital games being purchased and digital goods in general not being guaranteed to the people purchasing them. So, long term, that is, in terms of preservation. Now, if you buy from like stores like GOG and you have no DRM on your game, that's even better than buying physical. And some people don't understand what I mean by buying on GOG is actually better than buying physical. So if you buy on GOG, there's no DRM on the software that you buy, which means that you can make infinite physical copies of all of your games if you want to. You can literally back up each version of the game as it gets patched independently. And this is better than any physical or other digital ownership because it is like actual ownership. You don't even need the store. You can independently buy the game and own it and run the software on as many machines as you fucking want to. That that to me is ownership. Like if I can buy a game and I can install it on all 20 of my PCs, which is what you can do when you buy a game through GOG, not sponsored by the way. Just saying. You can install it on all the hardware you own as many times as you want. You can make as many backups of it as you want. So if I want to buy Cyberpunk 2077 on GOG and I want to make 100 copies on 100 discs of that, I can do that and archive the game as much and as many times as I want to, and I never have to log back into the store. I can literally purchase it, archive my purchase, and then that's it. I own the game. I own that game DRM free. That is better than physical. That is better than digital, other digital stores. That is what the future should be. And that is what owning a game should look like, right? Devil's advocate, what keeps people from sharing their copy of the game for everyone else to use for free? Nothing. But guess what? The only thing that keeps people from doing that now is just like the fact that someone has to crack it. So you could argue that we already do that. And we even did that back when physical media was a thing. And also back when physical media was a thing, we'd still would just pirate it anyway. That's not conducive to companies' growth. Exactly. That's why it's called regulation. We are saying fuck the corpos, brother. Actually, that's that is the exact point. Fuck their growth. They'll live. People will continue to pay for games, but they'll also be able to own them. And that's the point. I think my main issue with digital more so is just space issues. Games are getting big. The ownership thing is an equally true. I mean, yeah, well, the with SSD space is also like kind of a, I mean, that's a problem in general for sure that we have right now. And to be honest, we need bigger SSDs more than anything, because even with physical games, you still have to have a ton of SSD storage. So, um, yeah, I don't blame you. I think that, like, yeah, yeah. FFHD2D spinoff, FF Action tell main story to keep hype up. FF come out faster, please, or I will never tell my grandson about FF or SC when they're born. I don't think they should do it in like an FF HD 2D spinoff, because I think that like that's already like Bravely Default or like Octopath. Like I don't think that's like really what people are wanting. If they were to do like an FF turn-based spinoff, people would want it to look like Expedition 33, broadly speaking, or like Lost Odyssey, or like whatever modern equivalent to Final Fantasy X would look like. And they want it to look like that, right? They wouldn't want it to look like, oh, here's an HD 2D game. Because the problem with doing like an HD 2D Final Fantasy is that part of Final Fantasy is the spectacle, right? For better or for worse, Final Fantasy has to have mind-blowing spectacle. Like that's what it has to do. And in order to do that, I don't think that like HD 2D really fits that for what people are expecting, right? Um there really isn't like a replacement for turn-based Final Fantasy. There really isn't. I know that there's other games out there that are like it. I know that there's Bravely Default and Octopath Traveler and stuff like that. But really, like when you look at like what Final Fantasy VII was when Final Fantasy VII launched, or 8 or 9 or 10, I don't think, or hell, even 6 really, or 4, 5 through 6, like it's still not the equivalent of what those games were at that time when they were released now. You know what I'm saying? Because when those games were released, they were the most technically impressive thing. And this is something that I think that I don't want to, call a generational divide again. Somehow this comes up every time. But I do think that, like, if you're older and you're there, you kind of understand intuitively, like, how much or how important that is to that brand versus, like, I think a lot of younger people especially look at it and they probably think that they don't really see the difference between, say, you playing more Bravely Default and like there being like a new turn-based FF game in the vein of like what Final Fantasy was to them at that time. Does that make sense? I don't know. Square Enix, if they locked in, they would drop Parasite Eve remake. I mean, yeah, they should. Bravely Default is not a replacement, but I see why people say it can be if it makes sense. Right. I mean, it basically is a Final Fantasy game, for sure. But it doesn't replace the thing that people who want more turn-based Final Fantasy are wanting from it, right? Which is a game that picks up where Final Fantasy X and Lost Odyssey left off, which is why Clair Obscur kind of exploded, and those other turn-based games that Square Enix makes does it. And I've seen people make pretty ridiculous, bad face statements as to why, and yeah. But again, that goes back to what we talked about earlier in the stream, where certain engagement on Twitter posts can make you think that certain opinions are more popular or less popular than they actually are, right? Um, my thing is that, whether Bravely Default should have been called Final Fantasy or not, it goes back to what I was talking about earlier, which was that it used to be that games that fit the Final Fantasy brand were called Final Fantasy, and anything that was not fit to be a Final Fantasy ended up becoming a new IP, right? And so they would have a ton of pitches for new Final Fantasy games. And whenever those pitches failed or didn't, feel Final Fantasy enough to them, they would become new IPs. What happens now is that the brand new thing becomes Final Fantasy. And now the thing that looks more like Final Fantasy that fits the brand closer becomes Octopath Traveler. Becomes Bravely Default. And so they kind of did the opposite now, where FF is constantly chasing a new thing, and anything that they have all of these smaller IPs that are meant to serve the space of FF. But another thing is that games like Bravely are meant to fill the role of SNES Final Fantasy and not PS1 and PS2 era Final Fantasy. And again, a lot of this is where Expedition 33 really succeeded for those people, is that it ended up creating something that looked and played a little bit more like PS2, PS1 era Final Fantasy, which is where the void is at. They're not really creating something that fills that void. And I've seen people be super obtuse to the point of where they're saying World of Final Fantasy exists. And I'm let's not be super obtuse here. I've seen posts on Twitter saying that World of Final Fantasy didn't sell because it was turn-based. And I'm you have to be out of your fucking mind. Because that assumption alone is essentially saying that no one will buy a turn-based game from Square. That is what a lot of these people are saying, which is not true. Because why are people buying turn-based games from Atlas but not Square? If that were the case, right? It doesn't even fucking make sense. Other companies are making turn-based games and they're selling well and they're doing well. The reason that World of Final Fantasy didn't sell a tremendous amount was mostly predicated on the art style. Let's just be honest. And I'm not insulting the art style. I think it's cute. But the problem is that art style is probably not going to appeal to a large number of people. I think that the chibis in it are a wonderful callback to Final Fantasy chibis, right? That had been used for quite a long time throughout the series. But I think that after Final Fantasy VIII especially, but it was already kind of happening during Final Fantasy VII, when during battles and certain cinematics, they were starting to use full-sized character models. And all of the most popular mods for FF7 replaced the chibis with full-size character models. So that just goes to show you where people's thoughts were with full-size character models versus the chibis, especially here in the West. And so, when World of Final Fantasy kind of did the more chibi style for most of its game, I think that's where it lost people. And it's actually very funny because, if you play the game and you look at it, there's also the full-sized character models, right? If they used full-sized character models throughout the game, then I think that people would have been a lot more fine with it than them using the more chibi big head models that they did. Another thing too is that the perception of chibis on Super Nintendo and PlayStation 1 with Final Fantasy VII were a lot different than say a 4K chibi or like a 1080p HD chibi. And so we don't really have the same sort of perception that we did with, say, Final Fantasy VII, where that chibi was still used to create some of the best graphics that people had seen at that time. So I just don't think that that chibi style ended up appealing to people, especially in the West, nearly as much. I think Persona 5 Strikers got success, especially because it wasn't a P5 spinoff that relied on chibi. It was a fully fledged, serious P5 spinoff. Yeah, I'm going to be honest. Like, outside of Japan, chibi art does not typically perform super well. Like, when Westerners see it, they tend to get turned off by it. And when you use full size character models, Westerners tend to click with it a lot more. So, yeah, like FF8's visuals versus like FF7's, yeah, Western audience was going to click with that way more. And that's also why, Bravely probably didn't take off. Like, I mean, it did take off, but I would say that Bravely would have like become a much bigger phenomenon in the West if it did use full size character models versus chibis. I think it would have done like way better. As someone who loves the chibis and Persona Q, leaning into the EO inspiration, I do think that P5 Tactica in particular shouldn't have used them. The tactics combat was already a thing to make it unique, and that art style felt like overkill. Yeah, EO being Etrian Odyssey. Yeah, I figured. What remakes do you think Square will focus on after FF7 ends? Probably 9 and maybe 10. 10 would be like the easiest game to remake, I think, out of all the Final Fantasies that they could remake. I mean, out of all the PlayStation era ones, that is. Um, they could remake 1 through 6. I think all of those would probably be best served as an HD 2D game. Maybe not best served, but most likely served as an HD 2D game. In before 10 remake removes all the melanin. Yeah, if we have a pale Tidus, it's gonna be terrible. I'm sorry. Tidus should be tanned. That's like the whole thing, He's a beach bum. Why wouldn't he be tanned? I don't like the recent renders of him whatsoever. It's not just the Tidus issue either, bro. If we get pale Waka, it's Jover. It's so Jover if we get pale Waka, bro. I'd be like, turn this shit off. Even Bravely with full models would be would be actually be appealing. It would make the series feel less cheap to the bigger RPG zeitgeist. Yeah, again, this is something I would never remotely say anywhere near Twitter because they would just read it as like lol, tasteless like Westerner. And I'm not even saying that like, hey, you shouldn't appreciate those styles. That style is great, but it's literally just to say that like, yo, it's just not gonna sell in like the Western market. Like the Western market's just not going to give a fuck about that because they just don't like chibis as much. So I mean, it's one of the reasons that Final Fantasy moved away from it too. It's because, in capturing that Western market, FF8 style of having fully proportioned characters appealed more to people overall. And that's why when we moved on to Final Fantasy X, that's why Final Fantasy continued to stay with the fully proportioned character models because that's the thing that ultimately ended up appealing to people more, right? because Nine's characters are heavily stylized and somewhat chibi too. And you know, if you guys were there at the release of Final Fantasy IX, you would know that there was a lot of people that like, and it's so funny too because just in like the short time from like Final Fantasy like 7 to 9, Seven's chibis were kind of like Seven was still popular despite the chibis, but already by the time people had saw like Final Fantasy 8 and a lot of other like high quality PS1 games like Metal Gear Solid and stuff like that, people already had looked at like Final Fantasy 9 and were like, I don't like it because chibis. And I don't like it because like the characters look weird and they're different and they're not Nomura characters and like all this other stuff. And so um, people complained about Wind Waker so much they did, and it like a lot of times people thought it's because it was cell shaded, but really it was more so because Link was chibi. So a lot of people just don't like it, you know. And then not to say that they're right or they're wrong. It's just to say that if we're talking about like you know the sales and like that type of thing, then like yeah, people, a lot of people just don't like it. I think FF7 was fine because at least FMV, at least the FMVs and battle models weren't chibis. Yeah, I think that there were ways for you to look at representations of the FF7 characters that weren't as chibis that allowed it to make it acceptable that these were just different levels of abstraction that the game used to represent its characters, and as such, it didn't feel like the characters were always just the block hand characters. Sometimes they were scaled to proportional size. If that makes sense. I don't know if that makes sense. But that's why FF7 was able to get away with it. If they did FF6 remake, I would think that Kefka's if they rethink Kefka's the city portrayal. Really? What did you not like about it? Seven also didn't market chibis, and they weren't chibis during epic battles. Yeah, I think that FF7 was kind of able to like scale its presentation a lot, and so yeah, all the FF7 ads were mainly the FMVs too, right? They were mainly the FMVs where they were full scale character models, right? And you kind of understood it as an abstraction that the chibi FF7 character model was a representation of the full sized character model that you see in battle later on, if that makes sense. So you're kind of using your imagination at the time to project that bigger character model. Like, I don't know if that makes total sense, but yeah. Nine is not chibi. People just forgot the fantasy part of FF. Yeah, I wouldn't really call Nine like chibi. It's just stylized in such a way that it can be kind of conflated with it. But yeah, I would agree, Jossie. It's probably not as important to others, but I'm really worried about the re-trilogy safe for Sephiroth design, especially with the Magic the Gathering card art. Why so? Is this a Yoko Taro interview? No, no, no. Yoko Taro would never give logical responses. Nine is more so cartoonish than chibi. Yeah. Yeah, cartoonish is a good word to describe Nine because Nine's not even like it's not even like anime. It's like cartoon, more like it's like a good way to describe it. It almost has like a little bit of like western cartoon flavor to it, maybe even as opposed to just being like straight anime, if that makes sense. Because he has feet now, it's like the Dissidia design, and I want him to fly without all his limbs. Yeah, but for everyone who like loves Sephiroth's toes, this is like a massive victory, bro. You'll just have to take the L on this one for the Sephiroth feet lovers. What? Chat, don't react like that. Chat, you know it's true. He's the 10-toed angel. FF9 looks like a children's anime. I could see Studio Ghibli making an FF9 movie. Yeah, for sure. This is well and truly a weird comparison, but Nine's art style feels cartoonish in a way similar to how Transformers animated Mystery Incorporated and Ben 10's Omniverse are. Weird when still, but fantastic to watch all in motion. Yeah, I can see that for sure. Okay. I think we're gonna call it a stream for now. On Twitch, we'll raid. Let's just raid Curious Joy. Okay. I'll see you guys later. I do want to do a stream of Kingdom Hearts, and we're gonna like do some Kingdom Hearts. Maybe like I'm gonna try to do it like twice a week, but we'll see how the schedule works out. And then we'll finish Kingdom Hearts 1, and then we'll conclude it with a big essay at the end, just like we have done for Final Fantasy X. Okay,